everybody. Welcome to Called Up the Prospects podcast presented by Wonderful Pistachios. I am Chris Peters, joined as always by Cam Robinson from Elite Prospects. Cam, how the heck are you?
Doing well, buddy. Doing well. Still coming down from that high in Boston and Montreal last week. That was a lot of fun, but good to be home, back with the kids, back at the rink coaching and having a good time there. So trade deadline coming up. Lots to talk about here.
Yeah, a lot. Yes. And we are going to talk trade deadline. We're going to talk a little bit about the sellers, the buyers, and certainly the teams that have prospects to spare. And we're going to talk mostly about some of these key prospects that will be moved at the deadline. Also, there's been some additional movement on the front of what's happening in the CHL, NCAA new landscape where players from the CHL are now eligible. We're going to talk about that. The NHL, reportedly had some meetings with the CHL. We're going to kind of talk about the logistics of that and why the NHL even gets a say in where the future of this thing goes. But before we get into all of that, just want to remind you that we are excited to have Wonderful Pistachios as our presenting sponsor. I wanted to remind you that Wonderful Pistachios is a good source of protein with zero guilt. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And Cam, we still got to get you your pistachios supply because you look hungry, my friend. You look hungry. So we will get that. We will get that over.
I've told my family about it. They are stoked. My kids
waiting.
love pistachios. Everybody's excited. We're waiting for it. Yeah, with bated breath.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's on me. I gotta follow up. But we are so pleased to have them on board. And certainly we're gonna need that energy that you can get from that protein because it is gonna be a busy couple of weeks. When you listen to this podcast, more than likely it will be a week or a few days until the NHL trade deadline. And with that, there's already been like a lot of these kind of small moves, different AHL moves that are just kind of teams kind of positioning themselves. You do have to remember that even the AHL, those moves matter for those teams as they gear up for the Calder Cup playoffs. So you'll see some of those deals as we've seen already, like Jesse Ylönen going to the Milwaukee Admirals and Billy Husso going to the San Diego Gulls. Those are the kinds of things that are happening right now. But we do expect some of these blockbuster kind of deals to happen. And that is because a number of teams with significant assets are looking like sellers as we head into the deadline. And Cam, I wanted to start off locally with you because I know you're a Vancouver guy, you are a BC boy, you are in the mix here. And after the JT Miller trade, you kind of wonder what's next, if anything. The prospect that moved in that deal, I guess you Victor Mancini. But now there's talk of what's going to happen with Brock Besser. What's going on with Elias Pettersson? What is going on in general with where the Canucks are right now and where they need to get to, especially in this era of having an all-world defenseman like Quinn Hughes. So I start there. Are the Canucks really sellers, and do you think they have a chance to make some significant noise at this deadline?
Gosh, is there another team in the league that is in flux as the Vancouver Canucks? Like you mentioned, obviously all the drama that went on there with Miller and Pettersson in the room, JT getting traded, them flipping that first round pick with Melvin Fernstrom, who, by the way, has been torching it up over in Sweden since he got traded to Pittsburgh. That first rounder looks like it's going to get pushed to potentially be an unprotected 2026. So Pittsburgh did a great job getting that asset out of Vancouver. They got Marcus Pettersson. They immediately extended him. They extended O'Connor. Brock Besser's sitting there being like, what do I have to do? I'm the longest tenured guy on this team. All these newcomers are just coming in and bam, getting their freight, getting their term, getting no moves. And this is a guy who scored 40 goals last year, doesn't have a contract. Rick Tocchet doesn't have a contract next season, head coach. Are they going to be sellers? I don't think so. Francisco Aquilini, the owner of that team, he can't even pronounce the word rebuild. That guy, it is full steam ahead, get playoff revenue into the pocket, right? The old saying goes is every home playoff game a team hosts, it's $1 million in the owner's pocket. And, we've been saying that long enough that with inflation, it might be 1.5 or 2 million in the owner's pocket, right? So there's so much value for ownership to get into the playoffs. With a player like Brock Besser, both sides know exactly what the other one wants. Brock wants an 8-year deal. He wants that number to start with an 8. Vancouver wants it to be, in the 4 to maybe 6-year range. 4 or 5 years is what I've been told is where they're kind of stuck at. And so, we're down to the last week here. Is that if they can't get it done, are they really going to use him as their own rental and let him walk on July 1? Is Brock really, does he want to stay in Vancouver badly enough that he'd take maybe a 7 by 7.5 year deal with Vancouver, leaving some money on the table that he could probably get in the offseason? So many questions to be answered. But if they really took a step back and looked at this group as is, could they honestly say, we can win a round? We can win 2 rounds? I'm not sure you could say that about this team. Of course, you get into the playoffs and anything that could happen. But I do think that everything revolves around making Quinn Hughes happy. So retaining Besser, even if it's just for the playoffs, it's probably looking like something that Quinn would like. That they want to push, they want to play playoff games. But it's like I said, I don't think there's another team in the league that's in flux like the Vancouver Canucks are. And what they do with Besser will just be another kind of notch in telling us where the executives and the ownership are sitting with this club long term, because nobody really picks this team to be a contender. But I don't think anyone's really seriously thinking they're going to sell off assets either.
Yeah, I mean, what a weird state of flux, as you mentioned. I mean, and just the drama that has surrounded the team throughout the year. And it's like, well, when are we going to talk about the actual hockey? When are we, and that's the thing is like, they've played just well enough, right? And but well enough is not good enough. I mean, I think you look at a lot of these teams that are kind of looking at the sale of at a deadline. You think about teams like the Penguins and the Islanders, and teams that are careening to the mushy middle, which is the worst place to be. You don't want to be that. And
Mm.
I feel as I look at the Canucks, I'm like, is this just a middle team? Is this just a team that's kind of, yeah, they'll make the playoffs sometimes they won't. And with such exciting talents as Quinn Hughes, and as we know, some of those players that have been in kind of these trade talks can be. I mean, geez, it just would be a shame to see it all kind of blow up. And as you mentioned, it's unlikely to. But where do you go from here? What is the vision? What is the actual pushing forward? You have this cornerstone in Quinn Hughes. Do you have enough else? And I think that's going to be a question that is going to take time to answer. But we'll continue talking about the Canucks and certainly some of these other teams that as they look to sell off pieces. But another team that I think is kind of in a strange state as a franchise and where they're at in their development as a franchise is the Boston Bruins. And I think, coming into the year, you've got a coaching change already. You've got, different kind of rumors of unrest and all of these different things. And you're constantly batting down headlines that you don't like and whatever else. And now you're in a position where, even you look at the different trade boards that you can see around and you see Brad Marchand on there, you see other players. And the thing is that the Bruins, their pipeline is not necessarily all that strong. And they could potentially stand to not do major surgery, but are there instances where, yeah, we got to get younger? We're kind of out of this Stanley Cup era. But can we be competitive? And you've got, Pasternak, McAvoy, Swayman long term, so all these kind of things that kind of seem to set you up for longer term success. But let's look at the Bruins and if I'm going to pose it to you this way to start. If you're the Bruins, are you a seller? Do you feel like it's time to be a seller? Do you feel like it's time to retool a bit? You might not have to rebuild. It shouldn't be a studs down rebuild, but when you have a season like this, you have to ask those kinds of questions. Do you not?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been a run, right? It's been a long run with Boston being a quality team, right? Running back all the way to, 2010 sort of thing. They won the cup in 2011. They've consistently been a contender, which is why, the cupboards are pretty well bare at this point, right? They don't have a lot of high end assets pushing their way up, and their stars have aged out. They've either retired or now they're, in the twilight of their career, minus David Pasternak. So, McAvoy is out. He's injured for a while now, thanks to the Four Nations there. Hampus Lindholm's out. Like there's no like a bunch of guys coming back. Maybe we can make a late push here and get into the playoffs and go for a little bit of a run. Now Brad Marchand, has been so vocal that he wants to stay in Boston. He wants to finish his career as a Bruin. We saw them do it with Zdeno Chara. 1 year deal, 1 year deal, 1 year deal. Patrice Bergeron had kind of the carte blanche as well to do what he wanted, even if he had UFA status coming up. but they were in different spots as an organization at that point, that they were still looking like very viable contenders, and a team that could, push into an Eastern Conference final or something like that. Where this team, you can't look at it and be like, it's not an inspiring roster. They haven't played inspiring hockey all season. And so, teams are absolutely calling on Brad Marchand. Now, I don't think the offers are, earth shattering. Everybody recognizes where Marchand is at in his level of his career. And we saw it at the Four Nations. Is that is that the last time we see him wearing a Team Canada jersey? Probably, right? He looked like he was just a step behind for the most part of that tournament too, and he's just showing his age. But he does have cup winning experience. He has international experience. He is a playoff type of guy, that agitator, that leadership. So a team like Colorado. I was told that they've been, kicking the tires on a player like Brad Marchand. And so there's an opportunity for him to move out and go on another playoff run, and the Bruins can accrue assets. And nothing's stopping him from going back and signing there in the offseason. I know that not a lot of players end up doing that. It's kind of like once they leave, that door is almost closed. But I do think if I'm running Boston right now, if I'm running the Bruins, I'm a seller. I'm a seller for sure. Whether I'm moving Marchand or not, it's like that gets a little dicey, just because he is the captain. He's beloved. He's been there his whole career. Like, you're going to eat some abuse from some of the fans. But a lot of the smart ones will also recognize it's like, go get some assets for a player that isn't going to help this team long term anymore. So I think they should be a seller. Will they be a seller? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I'm not either. I think that there's been, real conservatism in their entire the way that they operate in general, especially under Don Sweeney. And there's been, more of that kind of, we're not going to take those big swings, and we're not going to blow up what we have right now. You kind of go through the process of, the end of Patrice Bergeron, the end of David Krejci, the end of Zdeno Chara, like all of these different things kind of, they just eventually retired and rode off into the sunset, and their legacy as Bruins are intact. Meanwhile, nothing was gained for the future. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
part of the issue here, is that there are very few opportunities, and there's certainly few things that would have the value to potentially bring in some of those younger assets. And I think if you're the Bruins, you're not looking for, if you are going to make any trades, you're not going to be looking for simply the draft picks, and certainly not draft picks from this season. You're looking for maybe more established young players, maybe some more of those guys, those prospects that are close. And those are sometimes difficult trades to make. They're not always the most exciting for the fan base. But again, when you have so few options available to you, you've got to do something. And I feel like they're just kind of, again, one of those teams that is dangerously close to kind of just staying stagnant and not really pushing the envelope either way, and not getting the draft picks that's going to help them rebuild their system, and not having anybody that's the next wave. You look at the Providence Bruins, they've had a good season. They have some interesting players there. They have some guys, but it's like, are they guys that are going to move the needle for the Boston Bruins? And are the guys that they do have far enough away now where, it's
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have to have some stopgap if you are going to move Marchand. So a lot of interesting things there. But one of the teams that I find most fascinating to watch at this deadline was a team that was fascinating to watch at the previous deadline as well, as a seller, and that is the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I think Kyle Dubas has made it no secret that kind of, hey, when we are making trades, we are looking to get younger. They make the Jake Gensel trade last year. They get Ville Koivunen as a key piece in that deal. He's been the top scoring rookie in the AHL this year, his first season in North America. That could pay some dividends here. Is it going to be a Jake Gensel level asset? Probably not. But at the same time, Ville Koivunen is going to be an everyday NHLer. I think he's going to be a good one as well. But those are the kinds of things that they have to continue to do. They start, kind of moving some of these players, trying to get a little bit younger, trying to find guys that could potentially help them in a few years. The questions are, who's movable, who wants to be moved, and what ultimately would be the value for the Penguins to kind of find a way to surround Sidney Crosby with enough players to at least stay semi-competitive, or, and the rumors continue to fly, but really, Sid and everybody around him and everything else, like, he's going to be a Penguin. I'd be shocked if he's not a Penguin for forever. But again, all of these possibilities are open to Dubas in terms, but that I don't know necessarily that they're all great options, but if you aren't starting to really strip things down, how are you ever going to move forward? That's my question.
Yeah, I think that some people were questioning it even like last week, that Pittsburgh needs to kind of pick a lane. And it's like, I'm pretty sure they picked a lane, right? They just traded Marcus Pettersson. They got a nice looking pick and a prospect. They have, I think, 20 or 21 draft picks over the next 2 years. Like, they're loading up. They got two this year already.
Yep.
They've got 2 seconds in 2026. They got 3/3 this year or something like that. Like, they're loading up on assets. A guy like Raquel, likely to be moved out this year, right? Like, we've heard Erik Karlsson is available. They don't want to use their last retention spot. They would ideally not retain on Erik Karlsson, as he has 2 years left at 10 million per. But they probably would have to do that to move him out. But he's showing at the Four Nations, especially early in that tournament. That was a good little showcase to prove that, hey, like, Erik Karlsson can still play like the Erik Karlsson we used to know. So if that's at 6 million or something like that, if they eat 3 or 4 million off of that, that's pretty palatable for a team that's looking for someone who can come in and create some offense and puck movement for them. So they do have pieces that they should be looking to sell off yet. Sidney Crosby is not one of them, unless he goes to them. He goes, I really loved playing with Nate McKinnon. I really had a good time there in Boston and Montreal, and I'd like a crack at it. That's the only way he's moving, right? But they've Anthony Beauvillier is a UFA to be. Matt Nieto's UFA. I expect that all these guys will be shopped around for mid picks, late picks, whatever, right? Get anything you can, just darts on the board. So I absolutely believe the Penguins will be a seller. It's just going to be really interesting if they, with Rantanen already moved, and we can get into him in a minute about the potential of him moving again. But I do think that they've, a guy like Rickard Rakell at 31 years old, yeah, he's got term. He's got, I think, 3 years after this one at $5 million, but he might be the best option for a team looking to trade out. Or maybe he's someone that they move at the draft, right? Where teams are looking, or in the offseason when teams in the free agent classes and all that great. If Besser signs for too much money, if Rantanen goes for too much money, like a guy like Raquel with term at $5 million as the cap's going up, all of a sudden that's like, that's a pretty good option for a team long term. And that team might see that at this deadline too, and bite and jump on him early and get him in there and just have a guy into his mid-30s at a pretty good price tag who's playing at a 35 goals, 70-point pace this season in Pittsburgh, where things aren't going all that great. So they definitely have some options. I do think they'll sell, and I think that they will be creative in doing so as well.
Yeah, they're going to have to be, and we have a piece coming up on FloHockey about the future of the Penguins and the importance of their AHL affiliate right now. They've got Koivunen down there, Rutger McGroarty is there, Owen Pickering is there. There are more young, promising players than what they have had. And yes, I know McGroarty's had a bit of a slow rookie season in the AHL, but Koivunen has had a very promising one. Pickering has already played a bit in the NHL this year. There are signs of life beyond what is at the NHL level. It did come out today as well that Michael Bunting had his appendix removed. Bad timing there. Another guy that, potentially could be an option. It sounds like he's going to be out for a little bit while he recovers from that procedure. So there's a number of things that have happened that do kind of impact your approach to the deadline. The real fascinating thing is, if they can find a partner for Erik Karlsson, if they can find something, it feels like it would be miraculous to move that contract. But like you said, there have been signs of life. There have been things that said, he's still Erik Karlsson. He's still a guy that can make a lot of plays and be strong enough for you. It's just a matter of how much are you willing to eat. And really, again, if you are the Pittsburgh Penguins, what it is now, what it has been this season cannot be it can't be close to this. It's either this season has been just a stagnant season. I think that's such a terrible place for any team to be, where it's like, we're not going up, we're not going down, we're just kind of maintaining. And yes, they're going down a bit, but at the same time, we'll see. The other thing, as you mentioned, Cam, they do have a lot of draft picks, 2 first rounders this year. They have they have no second rounders, but 3 third rounders. And those are things that you can use as sweeteners. Those are things that you can use in potential deals to get something a little bit more substantial as well. Are there teams? The thing that I wonder about, especially for teams like Pittsburgh, are there opportunities with other teams that are selling to find some of these younger prospects that are available, depending on what the price looks like. And I think that that's going to be, a potential additional path, as you said, being creative. Maybe it's not looking for the big fish trades. It's more finding these other opportunities to get the younger players and to get younger and to get better. Moving on
I'll
for the
just add
Penguins
one more
as
thing there
fast.
too.
Go ahead. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Just one thing and I should have brought this up earlier is with that creativity and with all the picks that they have is that, I mentioned they don't really want to use retention on Erik Karlsson trade, but maybe they can, filter him through a third party and they chip in one or two of those third round picks that they have, right? To have a team
Yep.
like Chicago or San Jose swallow $2 million for a third round pick or something like that, right? And you get that third team in there, and that's how when you accrue all those, that draft capital, you can spread it around in different areas to try to make things work for your big club.
Very, very true. Yeah, be a facilitator with the additional draft picks, and because you're more than likely going to acquire some more in this process at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely a very good point. Two more teams that I wanted to touch on. The first is the Chicago Blackhawks, still a team that is in the midst of a rebuild, not rebounding. Seth Jones with some comments about how the team just isn't getting better. Obviously, he wants a chance to get out. He's going to have. I mean, there's there's going to have to be some level of retention on that contract if Chicago is going to move him. Though I do think that in the right setting, Seth Jones could be a very serviceable, defenseman for a lot of different teams. It's just a matter of how much are you willing to eat on that contract, and what kind of price are you willing to pay, and what are the Blackhawks ever going to be able to maximize value on that particular asset because of what's going on. But clearly there needs to be some significant activity for Chicago to get more, and they have a lot of young players there. It's not like they have not done the job, but they're at that stage of the rebuild where those guys aren't ready to help you yet, and the stopgaps that they've brought in have not stopped anything. I mean, that there is still a massive bleeding going on. On top of that, I think Chicago is going to have to figure out who their long-term coach is very aggressively. I don't think, based on the way things have been going, I don't think Anders Sorensen is that long-term solution for them, though he did a great job in Rockford with a lot of these young guys and getting them ready. You think about guys like Ethan Del Mastro and, now worked with Kevin Korchinski at this season, Frank Nazar earlier in the season, different players that he's had success with. So Chicago's in a weird spot, Cam, because they are still very much in this rebuild. The Taylor Hall is already gone. That, seemed like a chip. Do they even have enough to sell, really? Do they have assets that teams want? That's the thing that I think is the big question about the Chicago Blackhawks. Who's really got any value at this point in that program?
It's a great question. We'll start off by saying this. It's another team that does have draft picks, right? 2 first rounders this year, 2 second
Yep.
rounders, 3 second rounders in 2026, right? So another 2 in 2027. So they are also starting to accrue that kind of currency that they can use to hopefully get players or to flip and get some help for a guy like Connor Bedard. But when it comes to assets, right? Like, you're absolutely right. Seth Jones, like, the filter is gone. He is speaking his mind. He is saying whatever he wants to say. Get me out of here is when you read between the lines. But was he make 9.5? That deal was bad the moment they made it, and a lot of people saw that coming. Not to say that he's a bad defenseman, but at 30 years old, with 3 more years, I believe, or no, more than that, like 5 more years after this one, at 9.5, like that is a huge ticket. So they are definitely gonna have to eat some money on that. When they inevitably move him, which if I'm betting, I don't think it happens here before the deadline. I think that's probably more of a draft day deal. But Alec Martinez, right? He's long in the tooth at this point now, but veteran experience, $4 million. A team could definitely take him as a depth defenseman. Ryan Donato, they could probably get a piece for
Yep.
him. Pat Maroon has all the cup experience. Again, very long in the tooth, very slow, but he's good in the room. Someone that you could bring in and be like cup winning experience, so we can help kick it out. A guy like Craig Smith. All these guys are pretty old, but I think that they could probably get some picks for them or some mid-level prospect or something like that. But no real assets that you're looking to flip out of here that's really going to help you long term. So with the amount of cap space that they have, and then they'll sell some of these guys and have even more of it. It's like they need to then use that and use the assets that they've accrued to flip, right? To go get a real player in his mid-20s, to go sign, to go take a healthy run if Mikko Rantanen makes it to UFA, if Brock Besser makes it to UFA, if Mitch Marner makes it to UFA, like go throw way too much money at these guys, because that's what you're probably going to have to do to link them up with a player like Bedard, because he absolutely, you can't leave him on an island any longer, right? Like you're going to disgruntle your superstar youngster before he even turns 21. So it's a tough spot for them, but at least they have loads of cap space. At least they have draft capital, and they have prospects coming up too. And they're about to get another one with a really, really high draft pick. So, it's not bleak long term, but short term, they definitely need to find ways to get better now, because losing is a habit that is difficult to break, and it can permeate into guys and into the culture of the room there. Even if you shift out veteran players, like the young core will still start to get used to losing and not taking steps forward, and that has to end basically right now. So getting rid of a guy like Seth Jones as quickly as you can, who's become unattainable there, and then finding real assets in the summer to take a step forward next season.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything has to be on the table for them. Everything has to be an option in terms of their ability to find ways to improve. And like I said, it's not that they don't have that next wave has a lot of talent. There's Artem Levshinov, there's Frank Nazar, there's Kevin Korchinski, who they did the right thing by him, sending him back to the AHL and saying, let's get you better before we bring you into the fold, and we need you to be a top 4 guy for us going forward. They have those core pieces. I think Alex Vlasic is a core piece for them. Connor Bedard obviously is the centerpiece for them. So getting that going, and yeah, this more recently, the idea of, this is getting bleak enough where it is seemingly affecting how Connor Bedard plays in as well as he's produced. He has 49 points. However, you're seeing fewer shot attempts per game. You're seeing lower shots on goal per game. And, that can't continue if it's going to have any level of success. So I think there's a lot of things that Kyle Davidson is going to need to do. And this is probably one of the tougher deadlines that they have, just because of the assets they have to deal with. But I think every single option has to be on the table. You even have to look at, say, does somebody take a stab at a Lucas Reichel in a change of scenery trade, or is there anything like, those are the kinds of things you have to even be thinking about going forward. So there's a lot that needs to be done there, but there's another team that we wanted to touch on before we get into some of the prospects that could potentially move as well. And this is a team that, boy, I tell you, it's really difficult to get any sort of read on what they are, what they're going to be. And I'm talking about Lou Lamoriello's New York Islanders. If they weren't sellers yet, boy, they better be now. I don't know what the direction is, what it's going to look like. But boy, Cam, this is a team that I feel is worse than they should be right now. But also, there's a lot of weird contracts on this roster, and it's going to be. I think there's some legitimate surgery that needs to happen for this to work. And you do have to remember that Matt Barzal is on long-term injured reserve. But then you're saying, okay, well, what else do we got? And it's getting very concerning, I think, if you're a New York Islanders fan, to say, what are we now and what are we into the future? Because there are a lot of long-term deals on this roster.
Let's get serious here.
Let's get it worked out here. We need to stretch. Right? We need to
This is right. This is a 500 hockey team, right? That has long-term deals out to Barzal, to Bo Horvat. Anders Lee is making $7 million this year. He's making $7 million next year, right? They've talked about extending Brock Nelson, despite him being 33, turning 34 years old. Ryan Pollock's making $6+ million on the back end. Adam Pellick's making $6 million on the back end, right? They've got to find money for Noah Dobson. It's been a weird kind of blend for a while now on the island, and they don't have a clear path out of it. So I think I think you have to just make the decision, and I don't know if Lou Lamoriello is keen to make this decision at his age and in this position to say, okay, it's time to start selling guys, right? It's time to see if you can move a guy like an Anders Lee who has term attached a little bit, right? Brock Nelson has been a warrior. He scored at a 35 goal pace for the last 3 seasons. He is the best rental center available on the market, which
Hmm.
means the price will be inflated. You go out and you move a player like him. Kyle Palmieri doesn't have a deal going next season, right? Pajot only has 1 year left on his deal at $5 million. These are assets you could probably move yourself off of, especially at the deadline. While teams are looking for depth and they're looking for experience, and these older guys, you need to bring in some high end assets. You need to know what you're going to do with Noah Dobson. We'd heard rumors that his name was brought up in some potential trade discussions. Is that they're undecided on what is this a true number one or is this more of an offensive guy, right? So they brought in Tony DeAngelo, who hasn't really been ripping it up on the power play, but it sounds like he's going to stay in that PP1 spot over a guy like Dobson. So there's a lot of these decisions
Hmm.
that it looks like they're trying to win right now, but this is a straight up 500 hockey clean team that is, probably not going to make the playoffs unless they get hot. And so, they haven't been a team that's really accrued many draft picks. They've just kind of sold a little bit, held steady a little bit, made their moves where they like them. When they traded for Bo Horvat a couple years ago, they shipped out a couple prospects and a first. But otherwise, it's just kind of been status quo for them. So again, similar to Boston, if I'm calling the shots, they should be a seller. They should be moving off assets. They should be deciding, extend Noah Dobson for a big contract or use him as like a big trade chip to get something really impressive that you really want. Maybe that's in the summer. But it's time to kind of turn the page on that old core, build around Matt Barzal. He's still young enough. He's still good enough to do that. And then a player like Noah Dobson for my money. And then off you go and see if you can't put together something in the next 3-4 years while those guys are still within their prime windows ish, to make a push, because this iteration of the team isn't good enough to get it done. And they're only getting older.
Yeah, older and just not just again, it's that very risky, mushy middle. And you think about there are going to be things that they're probably gonna have to buy out Pierre Engvall. I mean, that contract still has
Mm-hmm.
multiple years on it. They've got Anthony Duclair was a signing I liked. We'll see if that plays out. I think to me Dobson, Barzal, Sorokin, like that to me is a core that you can build around still, but also you have to think about where are the places that we can accrue enough value, because in addition to having this mushy middle, the prospect pool is not that spectacular. I mean, you've got Cole Iserman in that mix. You've got a few guys, Isaiah George played up this year, but that was more out of necessity than really readiness at this point. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things that you have to do as an organization to better position yourself for the future. And this trade deadline gives you maybe your best opportunity. Brock Nelson has to go. You gotta make that move tomorrow, because you want to get out in front. You
Yeah.
want to get a bunch of competing offers. And I'll tell you what, if I'm a buying team, I want a Brock Nelson. I'm willing to pay something because I think that's a really good rental, a guy that you could potentially re-sign for a fairly reasonable price. But it's unbelievable to me that we've kind of stayed in this zone. And I actually read in the Athletic too, Arthur Staple had a great column just about, hey, it's time, let's start scooting like there's no reason to wait anymore. We kind of know where they're at. And Sorokin has struggled this year. I don't think that this is his long term, like this is what he is. But yeah, I mean it hasn't gone well this year, and when it's not going well, you got to make moves. But now that we've kind of gotten into the sellers, and these aren't the only sellers out there. They're just some of the ones that I find most intriguing. Um, the assets are the things that make it intriguing. And I personally, we've talked about it before. 2025 NHL draft picks, first round draft picks, they do not carry the same value as a 2026 first round draft pick. They also probably don't carry the same value as established prospects, players that could get deals done. That's what it took to get Jake Gensel out of Pittsburgh last year. It was Ville Koivunen, it was Vasily Ponomarev, and then draft picks, and you go and you get a player like a Jake Gensel. We were talking before the show. I wanted to see, kind of pick your brain. You put a little bit of a list together. If we're looking at some of these guys that they're on this list, who are some of the most intriguing prospects for teams that should be buyers that could be, especially some of these teams that we've already talked about? Who are some of the guys that you see as potential fits in a trade for a bigger name and for a bigger rental? Or a guy with some
Yeah,
term as well, which is often what takes to get these kinds of players.
for sure. Yeah, and just to go back to Gensel for a half second there too, is that I was told really interestingly enough is that Pittsburgh and Dubas, they had offers for like first round picks and for potentially less, but maybe higher value assets at the time, and they chose to go that route, to go with the second rounder and the younger push to be NHL players sooner route. Um, which is an interesting one to do because, they're probably thinking like maybe, just maybe, we can get these guys into the lineup before Sid and Gino and Letang are fully gone. And so teams
Yeah.
that are looking to do the retool, right, are going to prioritize getting prospects like this versus getting draft picks that you might end up waiting 3, 4, 5 years for. So I had that in mind as I was, considering who would likely to be buying. And who is likely to be selling and what positions they're in. So, like a team like Carolina, I don't think they're done. I don't think their work here is done. I will say just quickly on Mikko Rantanen is that I know that there's lots of reports out there that, he has no interest in talking extension with them, that it's, likely that they would flip him. Now, do I think that Carolina would flip Mikko Rantanen if they couldn't get a deal done? I do. I think that they are a team that is so analytically driven that they would recognize that we gave up Martin Nakash plus we can't just have him for renting in for a few weeks and then lose him for nothing. Is that they are, but I think I've been told that they are steadfast in their belief that they can get him done. He's played 2 home games since he's been there, right? They've been on the road. He hasn't had a chance to be with the organization very long. He had the flu. He was away at the Four Nations. He had a bit of an injury, right? There's all these things going against it. I still think that Rantanen is more likely to extend in Carolina than test the market or get flipped. But they do have an asset like a kid like Scott Morrow, right? The defenseman prospect playing college hockey. Like he come up through the ranks in the NCAA. He's a puck mover. He can generate points. He's a player that I think that is expendable with their prospect pipeline and the depth that they have on the blue line. So I think that Scotty Morrow could be a guy that would be intriguing for sellers that Carolina could dangle. Do you want me to just run through this whole list, or do you want to break it down individually?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's pause on Morrow for a second, just because I think that that's the kind of prospect, a guy that he was not a first round draft pick, but in the years since he has become a very talented offensive defenseman. He's one of the top scoring defensemen in the AHL this year as a rookie, and so that helps his value. I think that makes sense. You also think about is Nikishin coming? And there's your number one defenseman, of the future. But I think Morrow is a guy who is close enough where some of those teams are saying, well, yeah, that's a guy that we could potentially do something with. And you're right. I think Carolina has built a prospect pool that has a bit of a surplus. It allowed them to move on from Vili Koivunen and Vasily Ponomarev, who are good prospects. But that I think you look at guys, probably Bradley Nadeau is going to be the one that would be very difficult to pry away from them. Whereas Morrow, there's just enough there where you say, okay, is he going to be a top 4? Is he going to be a really good 5 and a power play guy? I think that those are all things that are on the table.
Mm-hmm.
But he's big, he has skill, and so that makes it interesting. So I think that's a guy that's on there. But the next name on your list, I think, is really intriguing as well from the standpoint of a buyer and a guy that I think could potentially fetch something a little more potentially substantial, given where he's coming from.
Yeah. So the next guy I got is Callum Ritchie there. So, Colorado first rounder, monster season this year in the O. Played at the World Juniors, had a prominent role with Canada, even though they struggled. And normally I wouldn't put a player like this that's so young and is doing so well. But I was told earlier in the season that he was a player that they would be open to moving for the right asset, right? So when that was JT Miller was in discussion potentially going to Colorado, I'd heard maybe Cal Ritchie would be a piece that would be going back. Elias Pettersson too, and it was kind of like who was going to go. So I think for the right piece, a player like Cal Ritchie could go, that they could have their arm twisted and give up their top prospect. But again, it would have to be for an impact player. You're not going to see that moving out for, a second line or a third line center or something. I think that they're smart enough to hold on to that asset. But at the same time, they recognize where they are in their evolution too. And, their stars, they've already, they had to walk away from Rantanen. So they're not completely against cutting bait when they have to. So if they think that they can really push and go for a deep run this year and everyone can come back and be healthy, then I think that they would parlay a guy like Cal Ritchie into a right now piece and then look to maybe extend or get a piece that already has a little bit of term left on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'd be an enticing player, for a lot of different teams. He has that potential to be a top 6 guy if everything goes right and continues in his development. There's a lot of things to like about his game, but there's another guy that we've talked about recently that is a young player, and I personally I would have a hard time doing it, but he's been in the news and we've talked about it a little bit, and that's Brandt Clarke from Los Angeles Kings, another player you put on the list
Mm-hmm.
here for us to discuss. And that's a guy that he's an NHL player. Like, he's an NHL player right now. He was exceptional in the AHL last year. He's taken a step. He's been productive, but the question I think around Brandt is always going to be, is his completeness or lack of completeness as a player going to hinder his ability to make an outsized impact in the most important times of the season? That said, I think there are a lot of teams that would love to work with the defenseman at this age, at this stage, with some track record. So what do you think about Brandt Clarke, and and the likelihood that he could be part of a package going forward?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there are a great number of teams that would be very keen to add Brandt Clarke to their stable of prospects or to their NHL blue line right now to work with him because he is so gifted offensively, and you can't teach the type of things that he brings to the table. What you can teach is defensive positioning and battle and hard work and things like that. Those are things that players can learn. So again, I would not be moving this type of player, especially if you're LA. They've already moved out Brock Faber, right? And that hasn't probably worked out as well as they would have liked. Kevin Fiala is a good player, but Faber looks like he's going to be a stud for 25 minutes a night forever here. So LA needs to do something. We know that they're in a playoff position right now. They look like they're going to be strong enough to maybe win a round or two, but they need scoring. So would they move a guy like Brandt Clarke to add a real impact piece right now? I think that they would. I think for the right player that they would move off of him. You're filling a hole today and creating one tomorrow because now you don't have that quarterback of the future that should be there right now for you. Drew Doughty is not getting any younger, so yes, you have a guy like Jordan Spence, but it's a real asset. So it's another one of these players that wouldn't shock me if he moved, but I think it might come back to haunt a team like the Kings if they did go ahead and move him. But for the right player, would they move him for Brock Nelson? Would they do it for a pure rental center? I think that would be a bad move. I think they would absolutely do it
Yeah.
for a player like Elias Pettersson. If someone who has term and is younger and they can build around and they need a center long term here too. I don't think Quentin Byfield is on the trade market whatsoever, despite those rumors coming out earlier this week. So they do need to move something to get something, and we know that they want to win and they know that they want to add. So it kind of lands. It's Brandt Clarke as a potential piece here.
Yeah, I mean, the value is certainly big, and to have a player like him that, could be somebody that makes you better. Some teams, it would make them better right away. Like it would actually help them right
Mm.
now to take steps and head into the season. I did want to, I'm going to kind of combine a couple of forwards here as we talk about it because they're interesting. Gavin Brindley, Columbus Blue Jackets prospect, Easton Cowan, Toronto Maple Leafs prospect, Hendrix Lapierre from the Washington Capitals, Brad Lambert from the Manitoba or Winnipeg Jets, Manitoba Moose currently, and Grayson Sachin as well, another player that these are guys that have a different array of skills. Like I'd say Brindley has, versatility, speed, tenacity, can score. Cowan has been, kind of similar vein, tenacities, can score. Obviously, he's been up and down a little bit more, has struggled a bit. Hendrix Lapierre started with, he helped Hershey win a couple of Calder Cups. Hasn't worked out where he's been able to stick at the NHL level. And then Brad Lambert is one of those players where if you're Winnipeg, I think for him, he's one of their most valuable prospects in terms of upside and potential. So I think all of these guys are interesting, and they're all from teams that have a reason to beef up ahead of the postseason. I think if you are Columbus, why not try to make a deeper run? If you're Toronto, why not try to continue to find ways to fill any holes that you feel are in your lineup, even though Cowan has been a promising prospect. LaPierre, I think it might just be time where there isn't a fit for him in Washington because of how good they've been, but there could be somewhere else where he can play NHL right away. And then Lambert is kind of still a bit of a wild card to me. He's been up and down in the AHL. He's an incredible skater. Did not reach the potential that we thought he would in his draft year, but at the same time, he is starting to find ways to contribute. So as we look at forwards like that, and I group them together, I know there's a lot of differences, but just what is the case for moving these guys? Is it simply because when you also look at those groups that I mentioned, if you're the Washington Capitals, there's no way you're moving Ryan Leonard. There's all these, you have guys that you
Mhm.
definitely won't move. What makes these guys movable to you?
Yeah, so outside of Brindley, Cowan, Lapierre, Lambert, Sauchin, it's like we're looking at contenders that want to, Florida wants to win another cup. Toronto wants to go on a deep run. Washington is, everything they touch turns to gold right now. So moving off of those assets, like a player like Ethan Cowan, maybe the shine has come off him a little bit,
A bit,
perception
for
wise,
sure it
after that
has.
World Junior performance, right? Right. So like maybe they've missed their window to sell high on him already, but maybe they've come to the realization like, hey, maybe this isn't like a first liner that we have coming. Maybe this isn't like a legitimate top prospect. And if we can sell him as such, why not do that? Because this, the competitive window for the Maple Leafs is wide open right now. And especially if Marner doesn't have his deal, is like push chips in, right? Go get another center. Go make a real deep run at it too, right? Sauchin, Florida, they don't have a ton of assets right now, the Panthers, because they have been buying for a while. But Sauchin's a really highly talented offensive player that maybe could move the needle to get you a rental this year. Brad Lambert, like you said, right, playing on a really bad AHL team this year, but Winnipeg, it's like push all in. And like you said for Lapierre too, right? Is that they're not going to move Ryan Lambert, they're not going to move Cole Hudson. They're going to keep their top guys because their window kind of just opened up here a little bit. They weren't expected to be this good. It's kind of found money, but they
Yeah.
also don't want to mess with what they have in the dressing room right there. So they don't want to move out too many big pieces or bring in probably too many big pieces. So it's little movements here. And then a guy like Gavin Brindley, I just think that Columbus they're looking to reward their team for how well they've played
Mm-hmm.
this year and reward their fan base for some of the patience that they've shown. So again, they have so many young players in the NHL, in the minor leagues as prospects that they have a lot of options that they could use to add something to give this team a little jump start. They're sitting around the playoff bar, but they are good enough and they've proven good enough that you want to help them out and get that playoff revenue and get that experience for a team, right? We talked about it with Chicago, is that losing it's difficult to shake off. And so, Columbus has been losing for a long time. You want to give that, you want to have that experience of finding some success, getting into the playoffs, and learning what it's like to play playoff games too, right? For some of these young players. So at the expense of a guy like Gavin Brindley, when they have so many assets, it does make a lot of sense for them to at least consider a move like that. But I do think that Columbus would also be very much involved in like big game hunting. So using, some real assets that they have, whether that's like a guy like KJ, Kent Johnson, who's on the NHL roster already, or like putting together a big old package with picks and prospects to get a big fish that is locked up long term. Whether, I'm sure they would be very interested in adding a guy like Elias Pettersson if his name came back onto the market, someone that they can airlift in and be like, boom, we've got him now for 6-7 years. He's still in the prime of his career. And now we can use that to really boost this group going forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, I think that those are all guys that you're just saying, okay, well, if there's a move to be made, what do we have? These are things that you can live with parting with. You don't love doing it, but you can live with it, right?
Hmm.
There are other things in the system. If you're Columbus, you're hoping Caden Lindstrom's healthy, he's back skating, which is a great sign. That's one of your big guys there. If you are the Leafs, you still have some other younger players, and like you said, the shine might be off. Hendrix Lapierre, even though it hasn't quite worked out for him with Washington, he came back to Hershey and he's been, pointing up a little bit more, getting that confidence back. So those are things that can help you. And then, guys like Grayson Souchin, he can be a guy that, just is kind of one of those nice pieces, a guy that you're kind of betting on a little bit and seeing what he can be long term. Incredibly skilled player. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at Winnipeg and it's like, wow, look at how amazing they've been, but does it feel like they're missing that piece? And I feel like there's something there, and it might cost you something painful, like moving a Lambert or somebody like that. Before we move on from the trade talk, or at least this part of the trade talk, couple of defensemen. One of the guys you listed, Simon Nemec, he has been with up and down, mostly down for this year with the AHL team in Utica, the Utica Comets. Having a player like him on there, is it because of, New Jersey has a chance to do some things, or is it also like, hey, maybe it's not going to work out? This is a number 2 overall pick here, um, which would suggest that there's some value. We saw David Juracek get moved last year or earlier in the year to go to Minnesota. He's still in the AHL. There's a lot of different things. So that draft class, the decor that went, all of a sudden Matejchuk's playing a lot of minutes in the NHL and doing well.
That's my boy.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So what do we think about Nemec? What do we think of the value of the player is? It's obviously not as high as it would have been a couple of years ago, or even coming out of the AHL last season. What do you think is the overall value here of this player?
I think that the Devils would like to give it some more time. I think that they would prefer to wait before doing something like that, but they would also recognize that like you said, this is still a second overall pick, recent second overall pick, that a lot of teams would consider like a core piece in a return for something real. And the Devils, they want to push in. They don't have a ton of cap space, I don't believe, but they have a need on the wing, maybe a third line center. They have Dougie Hamilton. They have Luke Hughes. They have Seamus Casey, another player who could be used as a trade chip, though, as well. So they have lots on the blue line, too. So it's for a guy like Nemec, I think, again, it would be preferred if they could get a player with term, if they're going to move a player like Nemec. But I do think that there's a decent chance, similar to Urasek, right, that he would get moved for like a first rounder and like a player that could help them right now, like a late first or something, and then kind of like a middle six or just an asset that can come in and step in. Maybe it's on an expiring deal, so a rental style player. But I do think that he's an option. It's just one of these names. Same with I mentioned Liam Bixel in Dallas, a player that they
Yep.
would absolutely not want to move, but if you want to win a Stanley Cup, and there's a player that can impact your team greatly right now, they would consider moving that player. So I think it's similar to Simon Nemec, even though it's kind of stagnated his progression, is that they don't want to move him, but at the right price for the right player, I think that it's someone that they would move out.
Yeah, and those are the players too, where it's like the trade that you look back on and you said, should we have, there's always that risk of should we have done that,
Mm-hmm.
because he really did pan out. He needed a little bit more time. Same with Bixel. Like it's like, could it just be that you're, and because I think Big Cell of them all, like I think he's going to help a team win in the playoffs. I think he plays a pretty abrasive style that will work. He's got size, he's athletic. There's a lot of things that I've come to really like about his game. So we'll see. But there's a lot of intrigue in the list that we shared, and like we said, these are all a lot of things where yes, they're all kind of more in the hypothetical, but plenty of they make sense as players that could potentially be utilized for this. And certainly, from the different things that we hear from time to time about players, this is a very intriguing trade deadline, given the fact that some of the names that we talked about at the top, but also who is actually doing the selling, who is actually doing the buying, and what assets are available. There's a lot of intrigue. Hopefully it's exciting. I think player movement gets a lot of conversation going. It would be great to have an active trade deadline just because they're fun that way. But we're gonna move on. We're gonna keep the trade talk going though in our Beyond Belief segment, because this is the one where we kind of recap a little bit of what we did, kind of cover a couple of new topics. But I'm gonna start it off, and of course we read a statement to each other. The other each of us will decide whether it's beyond belief or if it's believable. And we're going to start with this one, Cam, and I'm going to direct it to you because you are Mr. Vancouver. And my statement is Elias Pettersson's days as a Vancouver Canuck are numbered. Beyond belief?
What's the number? How big a number are we talking about here? Hey, like I
They're numbered, as in they are
I
done now.
I think they are numbered. I think they are numbered. I don't think he's getting traded at the deadline. I was told in no uncertain terms from a couple different areas there that once they traded Miller, he was off the market. Teams continued to call, continued to be like, "Hey, what about this? What about this? What about this?" And they were told, "We're not moving him. We moved JT. We're going to let everything kind of the dust settle here." They were really hoping that the Four Nations face-off would jumpstart him. I don't know why they thought that all of a sudden he would be healthy, but it's an issue with his knee. It's an issue with his confidence between the ears. He's not shooting like he used to. There's a lot of things that need to change for him to get back up to speed. But I don't think that moving him right now, selling super low. I had a team side source say like this would be the worst time to try to sell him, anyways. With everything going on, is that you wait. Personally, if it's me, I give him the entire off season. Come back and you try again next year, right? And if things aren't working, then maybe you sell him. But I could see it happening at the draft if they really are looking to shake things up. And if they trade or let Brock Besser walk, right? If, they just signed Lankinen, if they, decide that, sorry, Thatcher Demko, you got 1 year left on your deal, you're not part of this too. Wouldn't it be crazy if after, all the boisterous love and everything that was spread across Vancouver last year as they went to game 7 in the second round and looked like they were coming long-term here, that if Besser, Pettersson, Miller, and Demko are all gone, within like 18 months of that. And if they're all gone, why is Quinn Hughes extending, right? So then he's probably gone too as a UFA, or they have to sell him before he gets to market too. So it's just like, I will say that is a true statement that his days are numbered, but it's a soft, it's not full throated. I do think that I'm still hopeful that he can find his way back, because I know that there's probably 31 NHL teams that think that they could fix him and then get him back to being a 40 goal, 100+ point player, which he has shown, to be capable of doing.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch that, because I think that there's still plenty of good hockey in Pettersson. I think that he's got plenty to go. And the thing is the biggest thing for Vancouver right now is, okay, if you feel like you're at all teetering on the brink, what are the tipping points? What are the things that are going to push you over the edge? And I think, potentially a movement of Pettersson would be the beginning of the end of whatever this era of Canucks hockey is or was, so it's just kind of, you have to figure out what you're doing long term. But I'm fascinated by it. I think, obviously everybody has been kind of watching Vancouver like a soap opera. But me personally, I hope it works out for him, one way or the other, because I think he's a good player. And I also think that when he's at his best, he's very exciting to watch. And, we haven't seen him that way this year. All right, I
Yeah,
turn it
I'm
to you,
with
my
you.
friend.
Okay, I got one for you here, and this seems like it shouldn't be the hardest question in the world. That Lou Lamoriello, 82-year-old Lou Lamoriello, is entering his final trade deadline. What do we think?
I mean, all logic suggests that it should, right? However, this is Lou Lamoriello, where I think you're going to have to pry the controls from his cold, dead hand. So I'm going to say it's beyond belief. I think that he will. The thing is that, is there anybody better at managing up than Lou Lamoriello? Because, yeah, sure, the
Right.
owners own the team, but do they really? Like, do they really control? And I think that's the thing, is that they've spent a lot of money. They've had a lot of these weird contracts that we kind of talked about. The Pierre Engvall one is crazy. You know, when you see it and you think about it and how it came together, and it's just like, how did that happen? And I do think that, you know, Lou, while he's a legend of the game, he's a Hall of Famer in every sense of the word. He is, you know, certainly one of the great minds. But I think that the issues that are befalling the New York Islanders may be beyond him at this point. That said, I think he gets to call his own shot, and I think that he is going to continue in this role because I think if New York was going to move on, they might have already done it. And I think if you're going to give him the trade deadline and all this other time, uh, he probably isn't going anywhere, which is crazy to think. And I guess we'll find out. And Lou, if you're listening, which you're not,
Yeah.
I just said none of this. So I don't want to disappear in wherever dark corners of Long Island might be waiting for me. So
Yeah, if
that's
Lou's
me.
listening, great job, Lou. That's all I have to say. Yeah,
Yeah,
great job, great job, Lou.
let me take
Nothing
all
but
the
love,
bullets,
nothing but
Cam.
love for Lou. Yeah, exactly. No,
Let me
but
take
I
all the
think
bullets.
you're probably spot on, right? It doesn't matter. He's 82. That guy's gonna outlive us all, right? He's probably gonna have
Exactly. I mean,
his finger on
and
the trigger here for
he always talks about still having the passion for it, still having the energy for it, you know, and it's like,
yeah.
hey, you're only as old as you feel. But anyway,
Oh,
all
that's
right, I
trouble for
got one
me.
for you here.
Feeling pretty sore today.
And I
Yeah.
yeah, this one I think you know we've covered it a bit, but I'll be interested to hear kind of just your overall thoughts. But we're going to see at least one premium prospect get moved at the trade deadline. When I say premium prospect, we're talking about a team's probably, you know, 1, 2, or 3 prospect on their board. Somebody that, you know, they would probably consider an A prospect, if you will, a guy that we feel will make an impact for our NHL team in the near future. So Cam, at least one premium prospect will be moved at this trade deadline. What say you, my friend?
Absolutely. Absolutely, there will be. I think that there is so many buyers and so few sellers that prices go up and teams will get scared and want to make that move. And I think that they will dangle out their first or second best prospect to get things done. And going back to when I was a kid and used to pretend I was sick 2 days before the deadline so I could lock it in so I could be at home all day watching that while my parents at work. You know, I gotta believe in that kid that's still inside me that I'm gonna be working this deadline and it's gonna have some exciting stuff and some exciting pieces moving out the door. So I'm gonna say absolutely at least one premium prospect gets moved to the deadline. What say you?
I think you're right. I mean, I think that because of the way that it's set up and because of the number of buyers, because of the teams that believe, and then also the what potentially is available to them. You know, you think about some of the big ticket items that could be out there, and you say if let's, you know, we're going to talk about them again here in a second, but if there's a big piece like a Mikko Rantanen, you know, Carolina can't settle for anything less than something like that plus, you know, something like that plus more, you
Mm-hmm.
know, so it's just those there's enough momentum that I feel like we're going to see a significant piece from one of those teams. And that, you know, a premium prospect, yes, the shines off a guy like Easton Cowan, but that's still a guy that I think would carry enough value to
It's
to
still
to bring
a
something
prospect.
back for you. So yeah, so that's
Yeah.
where we're at.
Okay. Last one. Mikko Rantanen is moved again before the deadline. It happens. The double flip. You on
Yeah,
board?
I know. You know, you said you weren't necessarily sure about it. That could happen, but I mean, I think, yeah, you know, if I'm gonna go out on a limb here, Carolina made took a big swing and a big risk, and I applaud them for that because that is if that state, especially because Nechas, you know, he had not really wanted to stick around yet. He was still playing amazing hockey and they let him go and he's still playing amazing hockey. And you got Nathan McKinnon saying, hey, this guy is changing the dynamic here. Like, holy smokes, you know? So I think there's so much pressure and there's so much risk. If you take him the other thing is that doesn't make it any easier is, as you mentioned, a lot of the issues that have prevented Mikko Rantanen from being Mikko Rantanen so far with this team. Um, I think you could potentially live with him as a rental, but you have to win the Stanley Cup then. And we know how hard that is. There are too many variables. Like if it's this or that, it's probably easier to make the trade than it is to go win the Stanley Cup with him and then lose him in the offseason. So I think that there's still a path forward, like you do. I am optimistic that they're going to find a way to get it done. But at the same time, if they don't, there's really no choice. I just feel like the odds of you getting a player that's going to help you for a few more years versus the odds of winning the Stanley Cup this year. I just think that if Eric Tulsky knows probabilities, he knows where it's at.
Yes.
But for all parties' sake, for Mikko Rantanen, for the Carolina Hurricanes, I hope it works out. I think Carolina's been a great market, and I hope that they absolutely make a run here because I love watching that team play. I really like the way Rod Brindamore coaches, and I certainly like when Mikko Rantanen looks like Mikko Rantanen, which he hasn't yet, and I think he can. The overwhelming evidence suggests that he is the player that we think he is, and not whatever this has been. So there's that.
I just think at some point, Carolina's been so good for so long. They've built up so many assets. Their drafting is, so solid. You have to risk it to get the biscuit. And when they traded for him, they recognized that they were trading for a player with UFA status who's going to be looking for a huge ticket, right? Unless he sits down or his rep sits down and says, no, we're not interested in staying in Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, yes, I think they flip him out. But if they say like, we just need more time, we haven't had a chance to really experience the city and the organization yet, but we like what we're seeing so far. We want to go on a deep playoff run with you. I think you take that chance if you're Carolina because there are only so many Mikko Rantanens out there, and they are very few and far between. Right, a player of his caliber, a 50-goal consistent, 50-goal plus 100+ point guy, power winger. He's just so unique. To add him to that playoff run, right? If you end up going on a deep run and you don't win the Stanley Cup, you getting bounced in the second or the third round, or God forbid the finals. I think that you can take that lump. You can still make take your swing before July 1, or you can trade him at the draft and get something back, a little something back, and then you use all those other pieces that you've acquired now and that you've drafted to go out and trade for a second line center or winger to replace what you lost in Martin Necas, right? Or you go and use that cap space that you
Yeah.
had set aside for Mikko Rantanen to go sign someone else in the offseason. Yes, you had to burn those assets to get him, but you got him for your playoff run and you took a chance. You got to risk it to get the biscuit. And I think that Carolina finally got to the stage where they're like, okay, the biscuit is there. We must risk it. So that's what I'm going with. I'm saying he will not get flipped unless he stares him dead in the eye and says, well, I'm not signing here.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, if you're Carolina, you almost have to say, hey, we kind of need a decision here. Like, can you give us the like where are we at here? Let's do some odds. But we
wink,
end
wink,
up running
nudge,
a little bit
nudge.
long, and so we're not going to have enough time to talk about the NHL and its influence on junior hockey. I do want to just mention quickly about that. The NHL has a significant say in the landscape of college and junior hockey, not less so in college, but definitely in junior hockey. And a lot of that is because there's where a lot of the money comes from. The NHL provides grants to Hockey Canada, USA Hockey. They give money directly to the CHL, to various junior leagues. So they are heavily invested monetarily, in addition to the fact that these players are their future. So they are going to have an outsized impact on the future of junior hockey. So all I'm going to say, and we'll talk about it more in depth in a future episode, is that get ready. There will be more change coming at some point in the near future to this landscape. If the CHL players being eligible for college hockey told us anything, it's going to be, a scramble still as everybody tries to figure it out. But that's basically what we're gonna be. So I think that this is going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be a lot of fun to follow. It is going to be very stressful, I think, for a lot of leagues, teams, players. It is going to be stressful for the NHL as well. but we will get more into that in depth and talk about some of the inner workings and why things can change, how they might change, and all of that. But we're going to talk about that in the future because we have one more segment left to get to, and we want to make sure we get to it as we close out our trade deadline preview. Once again, the NHL trade deadline next week. There is going to be movement. We expect plenty of it, and there's going to be a lot. But here is the question. We talked about buyers, we talked about sellers. But as we go into our final segment where we each have to pick one option, what is our one option? This trade deadline specifically, would you rather be a seller or would you rather be a buyer? So, Cam Robinson, I pose that to you. You are a GM right now. What is the best possible position you can be in? Is it as a buyer? Is the market strong enough? Or is it as a seller? Once again, is the market strong enough and advantageous enough for you to be a seller? What do you say?
I want to be a seller. I want to be a seller because there's so few and far between, thanks to the parity in the league, right? There's so many teams within striking distance that they want to hold on to their assets, or maybe they even want to do a little soft buying themselves. And so I want to be a seller, and I want to be a seller who has like a bunch of vets on 1-year deals that I signed in the offseason last year just to parlay into picks and prospects to help me move up the ladder in future years. So I want to be a seller, and I want to have all those 15 teams that are looking to buy come knocking on my door so I can jack up the price on them. I want to be a seller this year, even though I want to get better picks in return than what 2025 is going to offer.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing is like to me, one of the key elements is as a buyer, or as a seller is the specter of a weaker draft crop. And if you are a top team, you have a lower draft pick, you will not, the value in the 20s this year just isn't what it was last year or in most previous years. So for me, I actually do want to be a buyer because I do think that I can still retain some level of value. Teams will say, all right, we don't love this trade with this first round pick, but it's a first round pick and we can sell that to our fan base. That's not a good way of doing business, but that's
Yeah.
how it does get done sometimes, which is really unfortunate for the
Yeah.
teams because it's like, yeah, this year, I believe me, when we do trade grades and all that other stuff and first round draft picks from 2025 are going to be involved, guess what? That's getting graded on a curve, but like the wrong way. Like it's not
Yeah.
necessarily what you want. So I do think for me though, if I'm a buyer, I look at the parity, I look at the various things that I have at, and I look at the prospect systems. A lot of teams have built up good enough prospect systems, players that some of them they've developed well, and that's good. And that's why it's important to develop prospects. It's why you have to, continue to do that. But I do think that I could potentially find, even though it is a seller's market, and I do believe it is a seller's market, I look at the various teams and I say, okay, well, I see Winnipeg and the run that they're on, and are they scary enough where they're a juggernaut? Are there any juggernauts in the NHL this season? And I say no. So I give myself a chance. I give myself a chance in every way that I can. And and that's the thing. Like if you are the Carolina Hurricanes, that does, like, if you want to risk it for the biscuit and stay with Rantanen, it makes some amount of sense to do that because you have a legitimate chance. You are one of the teams that looks like a contender. But as I look up and down the NHL docket, and I look at the standings, and I look at all these teams here, and I say, who can I beat, and what am I missing? I'm going to be aggressively approaching that. And I think that there are enough teams out there that are selling that I could find something that's going to make an impact. And I look at guys like a Brock Nelson. I look at guys that have like a Rickard Rakell. I look at those kinds of players. They're not the biggest, sexiest kind of like superstar players, but they're guys that can help me. And really, if you're looking for the biggest superstar players at this time of the year, you're in trouble anyway. So I think that I would rather be a buyer because I don't think that I have to buy so much to gain an advantage on some of these other teams. So that's why I'll go with buyer. And also, if we're on opposite sides of the docket, then it makes for better audio. So we did that anyway. But yes, but I do believe that. I think to me it's great. The way that this market is set up, Cam, whether you're a buyer or a seller, I think there's a lot to be excited about. And I hope there is. Sometimes we build up the hype and it lets us down. When you were faking sickness, staying home from school, and all those other things, uh, you know, you probably didn't want like a debt. You wanted to see those massive blockbuster deals. Are we going to see a blockbuster? You think we're going to see one of those that's like the kinds of deals that make you wish you stayed home from school or work? What do you think?
No, probably not. That would be too much to ask. I
Dang
think that'd
it!
be too much fun. That
Yeah.
would that would have to be. I mean, Rantanen getting flipped again, or Pedersen suddenly getting dealt. Hey, maybe
Yep.
Rantanen for Pedersen. I actually had a couple of team side people bring that up to me, just wondering aloud. Would Carolina or Vancouver consider that? If Vancouver knew Rantanen would sign for 13 or 14 million or something, or like Sidney Crosby moving, right? Sid to Colorado. That's the type of thing where you're like, I am glad I faked the flu to sit here in my pajamas and watch this.
Yep.
But no, I do not expect that like earth shattering trade to happen. But I'm going in hopeful anyways, right? Keeping an open
Yep.
mind and hoping to be surprised, and doubly hoping that I'm the one who breaks it, and that'll be a real feather in the old cap.
That will be a feather in the cap, and then we'll have much to discuss in our future podcasts. But yeah, well, Cam, that's gonna about do it for us. We had a good long episode today to talk a lot about one of the topics that I think everybody will be talking about for the next week, and we'll see where it goes. Hopefully, there's something entertaining that happens, whether it's a blockbuster or not. And no, I'm not talking about all the tap dancing they have to do on the trade deadline shows, because boy, we have those are a little long in the tooth, as well as we talked about long in the tooth players. Our trade deadline shows are getting there as well, but hopefully there's some activity. Hopefully there's a lot of fun to be had with that. Cam, tell us what we got coming up on eliteprospects.com.
All sorts of good stuff, right? We've got to get that app, people. I was in Montreal and Boston. I was pitching it to GMs and execs and media people. Get the app. No pop-ups on the app. So get that. We got the feed going now too. It's kind of like Instagram for hockey. Check that out. That's free. You don't even need to have a premium subscription. I've got my trade bait board will be updated coming out on Monday. I've got that big anatomy of a trade coming out on Monday. We've got loads of stuff just with our prospect coverage, breaking down film rooms and our videos and stuff, all sorts of good stuff on EP. So just keep checking us out.
Yeah, lots of good stuff there. Coming up on FloHockey, we've got just around the corner ACHA National Championships, all 5 divisions: men's Division 1 through 3 and women's Division 1 and 2. Coming up, the brackets have been announced for Division 1 men's and women's, Division 2 as well. So make sure you check that out. College club hockey, some of the best in the world there. Lots of fun with that. Also, as we're approaching, we're going to be talking a lot about how trades are impacting the AHL. We've got that Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins piece coming up, plus another profile on Ville Koivunen that you're not going to want to miss. Lots of video features and things like that on Flow. And then also more NHL draft, more prospects coverage, all those good things coming your way. And of course, we'll have Called Up the Prospects podcast coming back to you next week. And want to remind you that Called Up the Prospects podcast is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Pistachios are known for their protein power, fiber, and better for you unsaturated fats, for a combination that may help keep you feeling fuller longer. Wonderful Pistachios. We thank you for your support of Called Up the Prospects podcast. And Cam, I wish you nothing but the best in the happy hunting on scoops and everything else this week. We're going to have a lot of fun getting ready. We will have much to discuss next weekend. We'll be pre-trade deadline, so we'll be talking about some of the other things that have probably already happened in the week and kind of give you one last little primer, as well as talk a little bit about the NHL draft and some of this forthcoming NHL, CHL, and all these other negotiations that are going on. Lots happening in the hockey world. Want to give a huge thanks to Ever for producing today's show. Big thanks to my co-host Cam Robinson from Elite Prospects. And thanks to all of you for listening. My name is Chris Peters. This has been Called Up the Prospects podcast. We'll see you next time.